Hi, you all. Thanks for so much for presenting on this final chapter of the new Jim Crow. And it's a vital chapter because it begins to not talk about the problem, but ways that we can solve it, right? And provides these kind of illustrative examples, and certainly is the springboard for all of you to begin to conceive of your final paper in the class, which is kind of, well, what aspect of this issue do you want to focus on? And that is a really important part of the book, because Alexander presents this chapter in a very complex way, if you think about it, right? I'm sure you all felt it just in your preparation for it, because there isn't a simple, clear answer. And she throws out a series of proposals, and you all are starting to cover that, but certainly it inspires all of us in the class to maybe think, okay, well, which aspect of a potential solution, of the myriad potential solutions, might we want to investigate further in order to kind of add some complex content to those considerations? So I'm just going to kind of go through it almost narratively. I think that your opening provided really nice context and coverage of the Jena 6 debate. I don't know if you all had heard about that, but it was quite a moment. And considering all of the debacle of Hurricane Katrina and already the pressures of racial inequality in Louisiana and in the South, this kind of stirred a lot of feelings, because all of the racial justice movements prior had been around law and had been around kind of issues that were more prevalently seen or clearly inequitable, right? Whereas we know that looking at the war on drugs, the prison industrial complex, the criminal justice system, they're all founded in this principle of justice rather than anything that is explicitly racist in language. And so the Jena 6 debate and many things that happened right around that time really had us begin to think about the issue that, of course, Alexander writes about ultimately with the book. And in particular, her kind of premise you all clarified really well, that if we continue on the path we're on with these kind of like micro chiselings of issue, the change will be minimal. And so then, of course, she launches into some of her other ideas about how we are to address it. It would be good to discuss the economics of the prison system more in your presentation, because there is that need to understand the economics in order to kind of follow the train of thinking that is required, that being the systemic rationale for the prison industrial complex to exist, but then also the ramifications of it within society at large. And so you started to approach it. You especially had some really terrific visual supplements showing inmate growth and kind of the self-perpetuating cycle. But it would be good if your group had talked about the economics as well, because Alexander is not a fool. She knows that we can't just speak ideologically, that economics largely informs how people make decisions, and a lot of times moments or instances of social justice will be eclipsed by economic desires and needs of our constituency. And so let's emphasize that a little bit more, because I imagine that a lot of students will be inspired to explore that idea. How do we make the reduction of the prison industrial complex become something that is economically viable? And of course, there perhaps are ways for that to be done. It would also be good to clarify that pro-con section around the war on drugs. It was just the elements were there, but it was a little unclear just in the way that the language was presented. And so in some cases it was just kind of hyper simplified. And what we want to do is reach under the hood and really kind of espouse these ideas, make sure that they are clarified to your class community, right? And in the section, let's talk about race, I would also say it might be good to script this out a bit because, there is so much complexity in these ideas, and when we just try to riff about them, when we're just learning about them, we could lose that complexity of the information. And I think in some cases it got lost. So it is really important that when you're trying to communicate these things back to a group, that maybe prepare the language just a bit more so that it seeks to evince precisely what it intends to, right? And in a way that you all understand it. But there were some really nice clarifications of colorblindness and its dangers. I like the way that was made extemporaneous, and it's also a complex issue. I know that you all have been reading about it quite a bit, both in White Fragility and now in Alexander's text. And so, but it's always good to clarify that because we know that many of us love the idea of colorblindness, right? And maybe we've even adopted it innocently or ignorantly as a means to somehow achieve an equitable society, But as we know, it eschews that which cannot really be ever ignored, right? So that was good clarification of that, and I like the fact that you all posited some space for that in this presentation because you can see how, through a slightly different language, how D'Angelo's ideas are being applicable to this more kind of scholarly text, right? I also really liked that question regarding Obama's maintained support of the criminal justice system. Again, it's this idea of black exceptionalism, right? Where, we have a black president, so everything is going to be fixed. Well, no, because it is not about the man's identity himself, but it's about a systemic system that is a systemic problem that goes beyond just an individual and whether or not they're black, white, whatever. And so that question is really fascinating, and maybe someone will actually do it for their final paper. That would be kind of exciting. You had good questions overall, too. I liked all 4 of them. I thought that they resonated very well with the text, but also seemed to be authentically coming from places of your own curiosity and inquiry. And so I think that they can be hung in the list of questions that people may want to tackle for further investigation. And so ultimately, we had a lot of great information. I thought in particular around the sections on specifically the prison system. You had wonderful visual supplements. Just make sure that language is serving to clarify the complexities of the chapter rather than oversimplifying them. And, keep practicing this idea of how we can provide supplements for information in a way that will allow people that you're presenting to glean information in a clearer fashion. Thanks you all for your work, and I'll see you soon, kind of.